Hello, my name is Leah. At my own sister's baby shower, she stood up and declared she was carrying twins with my husband. Everyone turned to watch me crumble. But what they didn't know was that I had been carrying a secret of my own, one piece of paper that could erase their performance in an instant. How do you survive when your own family builds a stage just to watch you fall? My name is Leah. I'm 34 years old, the youngest daughter in a family that has always seemed to place its spotlight elsewhere. I live in Chicago now, not far from where I grew up, and I've been married to Oberon for nearly a decade. On the surface, my life looks stable, even enviable. Steady job, solid marriage, surrounded by family. But surfaces deceive, and what lies beneath them often tells the truth no one wants to say out loud. That night, in the middle of spring, I joined my relatives for a birthday gathering. The house buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, the kind of warmth that looks good in pictures but feels hollow when you're sitting in it. The air smelled faintly of roasted chicken and candles burning in the dining room, and the chatter of cousins, uncles, and aunts created a steady hum. Yet under that hum, I felt the same imbalance that had followed me my whole life, how my parents' eyes always drifted to my younger sister, Thalassa, how their praise seemed endless for her and minimal for me. It wasn't envy I felt, but a kind of ache, like watching a balance scale tilted so far in one direction that you knew it could never even out again. People in America talk often about equality and fairness, but when it comes to families, favoritism is as old as time. I remembered Theodore Roosevelt's words, "Comparison is the thief of joy." I had repeated it to myself many times over the years, especially when my parents' compliments piled on Thalassa like crowns, leaving me with the scraps of acknowledgement. That evening, I told myself once again to hold steady, to smile politely, to hide the bitterness that kept finding its way up my throat. But something felt different, like the cracks that had been hairline fractures for years were finally beginning to widen. After dinner was cleared, we gathered in the living room for cake and presents. Balloons floated at the corners, their strings brushing shoulders as people moved about. My mother brought out a large box wrapped in metallic paper, announcing proudly, "This is for Thalassa. She deserves it after all the hard work she's been doing." The wrapping paper came off quickly, and there it was, a set of car keys attached to a tiny silver bow. A brand new sedan, parked outside, waiting for her. The room erupted in applause, cousins rushing to hug her, relatives gushing about how thoughtful my parents were. My father beamed, clapping Oberon on the back as if to include him in the triumph. I sat quietly, my smile plastered on, but my hands folded tightly in my lap. Then my mother turned to me, almost as an afterthought, and handed me a small, flat package. Inside was a scarf, soft fabric, but clearly something chosen without much care. "Sweetheart," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "you've always been simple. You don't need much." Laughter trickled awkwardly around the room, people shifting uncomfortably, not sure whether to agree or stay silent. I forced a smile and nodded, thanking her softly, though inside it felt like lemon poured over a paper cut, sharp, stinging, and impossible to ignore. The car keys jingled as Thalassa waved them around, promising to take people for rides, her joy filling the space like perfume too strong to escape. I sat back, letting my eyes drift across the room. This wasn't new. I had always been the reliable one, the sister who didn't complain, who managed things without needing attention. My parents mistook that steadiness for lack of ambition, my silence for weakness. They rewarded drama, showmanship, and Thalassa played that part perfectly. I had learned to let it slide, but that night, as everyone toasted to her, I felt the humiliation sink deeper. When we moved into the dining room for the meal, the sting only grew sharper. The long, polished table stretched the length of the room, laid out with dishes steaming in the soft light. Everyone's seats were marked, tiny name cards set carefully at each plate. I walked slowly around until I found mine, not at the head, not even along the sides, but tucked close to the swinging door that led into the kitchen. I hesitated before sitting, the scrape of my chair loud in the hush. I noticed how Thalassa was placed at the center, her name card decorated with a small ribbon. My parents flanked her on either side, beaming proudly. Oberon was across from her, leaning back with ease, smiling faintly as if everything was perfectly in place. Just as I settled into the chair, a guest I didn't recognize leaned toward me, frowning. "Excuse me, are you with catering?" I froze, the words hanging in the air. Before I could answer, Thalassa laughed lightly, placing her hand on Oberon's arm. "Oh no," she said sweetly. "She's just my sister." Her tone cut more than the words themselves, delivered like a joke meant for the crowd, and the room chuckled nervously. I stayed composed, sipping my water, but inside my thoughts sharpened like glass. Humiliation wasn't accidental anymore. It was orchestrated. I had been placed near the serving station deliberately, away from the spotlight, where I could be mistaken for someone paid to refill glasses. As the meal went on, I kept my smile steady, answering politely when spoken to, laughing at jokes I didn't find funny. But inside, my mind ticked, cataloging every slight, every laugh at my expense. It struck me then how exclusion often works. Not with loud declarations, but with subtle placements, with the chair tucked just out of sight, with the scarf that looked like an afterthought next to gleaming car keys. These wounds, small to an outsider, are the kind that bruise deepest, because they tell you quietly that you don't belong. And when dessert was finished and the guests began to disperse into smaller groups, I slipped onto the back porch for some air. The spring night was cool, the smell of lilacs drifting from the garden. I leaned against the railing, letting the quiet wrap around me. My thoughts pressed forward, connecting pieces I had ignored for too long. This wasn't the first time I felt erased, but that night it weighed heavier, like a stone pressing against my chest. Silence had become my shield over the years. I remembered whispering to myself once, "Sometimes silence is the loudest scream." I had lived by it, believing that by holding my tongue I was keeping peace. But peace isn't real when it's built on erasure. I looked back through the dining room window, watching Thalassa laugh loudly at something Oberon had said. My husband's eyes caught mine for just a second, pitying, as if he knew the role I was expected to play. That look, that practiced sympathy, was worse than anger. It told me he thought I was predictable, that I would accept humiliation and return home quietly. But something inside me shifted that night. I would not allow myself to be erased forever. I thought of the moments leading up to this, the odd pauses in Oberon's words, the times his phone buzzed and he stepped outside. And then I remembered. Just days earlier, I had seen something that hadn't left my mind since. I couldn't stop replaying that message on Oberon's phone. 3 words that made my stomach twist. I remember that evening in our apartment as if it had been carved into me. It was a weekday, quiet outside, the hum of the city softened by the thick windows. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, the smell of onions and garlic filling the air. Oberon had said he'd be working late, again. That had become his refrain over the past year. "I'll be home late, don't wait up." He would smile when he said it, with that practiced casualness, as if repetition could make it true. I told myself not to think too much of it. That's what people in marriages do when suspicion scratches at their ribs. They tell themselves not to make mountains out of molehills. It's what friends advise when you vent. Don't overthink, don't become paranoid, it's probably nothing. Americans love the phrase, "you're just imagining things." But in my experience, when someone insists you're imagining it, there's usually something right in front of you. The apartment was calm, the kind of quiet that feels safe on the surface, but that evening it felt heavy, unnatural. I set the table for 2, though I already knew he wouldn't be home in time to eat. Then his phone, left on the counter by mistake, lit up with a soft glow. Just one vibration, one small light in the dim kitchen. I almost ignored it. Out of habit, out of the unspoken rule that you don't snoop. But my eyes caught the words anyway, burned onto the screen like they were meant for me. "Our twins. Can't wait for the shower." My breath stuck. My hand froze above the pot, wooden spoon in mid-air. In 1 second, the soup, the kitchen, the entire apartment blurred. The phone lay there, a small rectangle of light exposing the darkest truth. Those 3 words, "our twins," cut through me sharper than any insult, sharper than all the years of favoritism and dismissal combined. I didn't scream. I didn't gasp. My body knew better. I forced myself still, made my breathing even, as if I hadn't seen it. My eyes stayed on the bubbling soup while inside, my mind raced at impossible speed. Twins. Shower. It wasn't a typo, it wasn't a joke, it was a plan. The front door clicked. Oberon walked in, loosening his tie, the smell of his cologne preceding him. He glanced at the counter and then at me. "Why are you holding my phone?" he asked lightly, like he was commenting on the weather. I turned, spoon still in hand, and smiled faintly. It buzzed. Thought it might be work. My voice sounded steady, even gentle. Inside, I was screaming. He chuckled, took it from me, and kissed my forehead. Always worrying too much. He put it in his pocket, as if that simple movement could erase what I had seen. At dinner, he talked about the office, about deadlines and coworkers. I nodded in the right places, smiled when appropriate. But my mind was stuck on that message, on the way it confirmed everything I had felt pressing at me for months. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't paranoia. It was betrayal, brazen enough to be announced at a family event. As he chewed, laughing at his own story, my thoughts traveled back to a day months before. He had gone to a fertility clinic on his own, saying he'd handle the test while I was at work. That evening he came home, put on his most sympathetic expression, and held me like a man delivering bad news. I remember every word. "They said I'm fine. It must be you." That sentence had burrowed into me like poison. For months, I carried the shame of infertility, convinced that my body was the one failing us. I cried in bathrooms, in the middle of the night, into pillows while he stroked my hair and murmured, "It's not your fault," with the voice of a liar who knew it was all his doing. And now, sitting across from him at our own dinner table, I saw the dots connecting. And he hadn't just lied. He had let me shoulder the weight of failure alone. He had let me believe I was broken. That's what gaslighting is, making you doubt your own truth until you begin to live in their lie. I swallowed hard, my spoon clinking against the bowl. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. I looked at him, studied the way he leaned back, confident in my silence. He thought he still controlled the story, but inside me, something shifted. I decided in that moment I would not explode, not confront him too early. I would not hand him the drama he expected, the scene he could twist against me. Instead, I would let him believe I was blind, that I was still the simple, steady wife who didn't need much. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let people think you can't see until they walk face first into the wall they built. That night, I made a vow. My silence would not be surrender. It would be strategy. I pushed my chair back, collected the bowls, washed dishes as if everything were ordinary. He leaned in the doorway, talking about his next late night at the office, watching me with those pitying eyes. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile he didn't understand. Because I already knew. The shower they were planning as their triumph would not end the way they expected. It would not be my undoing. They thought the shower would be their triumph, but it would be their undoing. The message on Oberon's phone didn't just sting in the moment. It ripped open older wounds I had carefully stitched shut. Sitting at the table with him that night, his voice droning on about office politics and deadlines, I found myself drifting away, sinking into memories that had never truly left. Betrayal rarely begins with a single act. It's usually planted years before, watered by favoritism, cultivated by silence. Families love to say they treat their children equally, but anyone who's lived it knows the truth is often different. In many homes, there's the golden child, the one who shines brightly, who gets celebrated for even the smallest achievements. And then there's the reliable one, the one who is steady, responsible, but invisible. I was the latter. Thalassa, my younger sister, was the former. Americans have an expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Thalassa squeaked, loudly, and was greased endlessly. I, on the other hand, was silent, steady, and thus overlooked. That imbalance had shaped my entire life, and the memory of it surged back with fresh fury. I once read a line that had stayed with me. Sometimes the people you'd take a bullet for are the ones behind the trigger. And that, I realized, was the story of my family. The soup cooled in front of me as my mind wandered years back to a Christmas that had hurt more than I let anyone see. It had taken me weeks to finish it, a quilt, carefully stitched by hand, squares of fabric chosen for the memories they held. A scrap from an old dress of mine, a piece from my father's shirt, a floral print that matched our mother's favorite apron. I poured myself into it, imagining my mother's face when she unwrapped it, picturing her recognizing the thought in labor. The living room had been packed that night, relatives sipping cocoa, wrapping paper flying. I handed the gift to my mother, my palms sweaty with nervousness, but smiling with pride. She peeled back the paper slowly, revealing the folded quilt. Her eyes widened, but before she could even say a word, Thalassa jumped in, her voice bright and sure. "This was my idea," she declared, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I picked out the pattern, told Leah to put it together." The room gasped in admiration. "Oh, Thalassa, you're always so thoughtful," one aunt cooed. Another chimed in, "Such a creative girl, always thinking of everyone." My mother hugged the quilt, kissing Thalassa on the cheek, while I sat there frozen, smile glued onto my face. No one asked me. No one noticed the needle marks on my fingers, the dark circles under my eyes from nights spent hunched over fabric. No one wondered if maybe the truth was simpler, that I had done it myself. I remember nodding, saying softly, "I'm glad you like it," though inside, I burned. It was then I understood how truth can be erased so easily, how people believe what they want to believe, especially if it confirms the story they already cherish. My warmth had been stolen, my identity stitched out of the picture with just a few careless words. Another memory surfaced, even sharper, from a Thanksgiving dinner years later. The table was heavy with food, turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie. Relatives packed around, laughter mixing with the sound of forks scraping plates. It was one of those moments families claim to treasure. Until my parents, glasses raised, made an announcement. "We can't wait for Thalassa to give us real grandchildren," my father said, pride swelling in his voice. The words cut clean through me. Real grandchildren. As if the years of marriage I had shared with Oberon meant nothing. As if my attempts, my tears, my quiet longing, all amounted to a fraud. The room had gone awkwardly still for a beat, then recovered into chatter. No one corrected them. No one said, "Leia is their daughter too. Her children would be just as real." Not even Oberon. He only reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it with that same pitying pressure I had come to despise. He didn't defend me. He never did. In American culture, infertility is still a shadow topic, whispered about, carried like shame by women, rarely by men. And in my family, that shadow became my identity. I bore it quietly because speaking up felt impossible, and because silence was easier for everyone else. There's a phrase I once read: "Silence in the face of injustice is complicity." That night, their silence screamed louder than any insult. My parents' words lingered long after dessert plates were cleared, echoing in my mind, erasing me again and again. Back in the present, staring across the table at Oberon, his smug calmness only sharpened the pain. That message, our twins, can't wait for the shower, wasn't an accident. It wasn't sudden. It was the logical conclusion of years of erasure, of a family that had always made room for Thalassa by pushing me out of frame. I sipped water slowly, letting the coolness ground me, and told myself, the past wasn't just a wound, it was training for this war. Every dismissal, every stolen credit, every cruel phrase, they had been sharpening me, even when they thought they were breaking me. I would stay silent, but not out of weakness. My silence now was sharper than words, more dangerous than rage. I would let them underestimate me, let them believe I was still the reliable one, the quiet one. And then, when the moment came, I would write the ending myself. They had spent years writing me out of the story, but at the shower, I would hold the pen. A week before the baby shower, the family arranged a brunch at a downtown cafe. They called it a celebration of unity, though the word felt like a costume everyone was forced to wear. The cafe was bright, filled with the clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversations from other tables. But at ours, the atmosphere was carefully staged. My parents had insisted on it, presenting it as a way to show everyone how close we all remained, even with the chaos of adult lives. As I walked in, relatives greeted me with polite smiles, their arms reaching out for quick embraces. The warmth in their gestures didn't reach their eyes, and I felt the chill beneath it. Across the room, Thalassa was already in the center, her voice rising above the others, telling some story that had everyone laughing. Oberon sat beside her, leaning in just enough to look attentive, playing his role perfectly. He chuckled at the right moments, nodded as if her words carried wisdom, while she preened under the attention. I slipped into my seat, glancing around at the polished wood floors and the framed photos of old Chicago lining the walls. Brunches in America have become more than meals. They are stages for subtle comparisons, where every dish ordered, every smile given, becomes a performance. And in my family, no one knew that better than Thalassa. As I spread the napkin over my lap, I thought of something I had once read. It's not always the knife you see coming that cuts the deepest. I tucked that thought into my chest like armor. It seemed written for moments exactly like this. The meal went on with plates of pancakes, omelets, and coffee poured endlessly by servers who wove in and out of the narrow aisles. Just as conversations lulled, Thalassa rose from her chair with sudden enthusiasm. Before I could register what she was doing, she turned to me, arms outstretched. "Leah," she said sweetly, "come here." And before I could protest, she wrapped me in a hug right there in front of everyone. Her arms tightened around me, but her voice, loud and clear, carried to every corner of the table. "I know this must be hard for you, but we're all family. We'll get through this together." The words dripped with sugar, but every syllable sliced. Heads nodded around the table, relatives offering sympathetic glances toward her, not me. They looked at her as if she were the one showing strength, the one carrying the burden. It was a masterstroke of performance, making her appear compassionate while reminding everyone that I was on the outside of the joy she carried. I stayed still, feeling her grip like a dagger pressed between my ribs. Over her shoulder, I caught Oberon's face. His lips curved into the faintest smirk, as though he enjoyed watching me pinned there, humiliated by their play acting. That expression told me more than words ever could. He wasn't just complicit, he was entertained. Inside, anger burned hot, but I forced my body into calmness. My breathing stayed even, my face relaxed. I knew better than to give them what they wanted, a public crack, a show of tears. Let them believe I was steady, unshaken. They could think what they wanted, but I had my own truth tucked close, waiting. I leaned in during the embrace, lowering my voice to a whisper only she could hear. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts." Her body stiffened for a heartbeat, the mask slipping just enough for me to feel the victory. But she recovered quickly, releasing me with a bright smile and patting my shoulder like an actress exiting stage right. A cousin leaned across the table, watching me closely. "Leah, are you okay with all this?" I turned toward them, my voice soft but firm. "More than okay. I'm patient." The words hung in the air, carrying a weight I intended. Silence followed for a beat too long, just enough for unease to ripple through. Relatives shifted, brushed off the chill, and returned to their food, dismissing my words as vague. But Thalassa's eyes flickered, and I knew she had heard the depth behind them. The rest of the brunch moved forward, laughter rising again, forks clinking against plates, but the tension stayed coiled beneath. I ate quietly, nodding when addressed, sipping coffee while my mind worked in silence. I noticed the way Thalassa avoided meeting my eyes, how Oberon seemed suddenly more attentive to her, as though to cover the stumble. When it ended, we filed out onto the street. The spring air carried the faint smell of rain, the sky cloudy but holding. I walked a few steps behind, watching as my parents flanked Thalassa, their pride practically glowing. Oberon trailed slightly, his hand on her back. To anyone else, it looked like a picture of a happy family. To me, it looked like a stage waiting for the curtain to fall. As I moved away from the group, I repeated to myself, sometimes the best warning is silence. People don't hear it until it's too late. My own silence was that warning, sharper than any words I could have thrown across the table. Americans have another saying, "Still waters run deep." I felt the truth of it settle inside me. My silence wasn't emptiness, it was depth, planning, the steady tide pulling back before the crash. Thalassa believed her manipulations were working. She believed she had shaped the room to her favor. Let her believe. Overconfidence would be her undoing. She thought she had everyone fooled, but she had forgotten that I had seen the message. the 3 words that told me everything. Our twins. I kept my plan close, hidden behind faint smiles and polite nods. They thought I was subdued, playing the same quiet role I had always played. What they didn't see was the resolve hardening inside me. They thought my silence was surrender, but it was the sharpest warning I could give. 3 days before the shower, my parents gathered the family for dinner at a restaurant on the north side of Chicago. From the outside, it looked like a simple family gathering, a chance to share a meal and laughter before the big event. But as soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension beneath the smiles. Conversations floated across the room, light and cheerful on the surface, but every glance and pause carried the weight of unspoken truths. The table stretched long under glowing pendant lights. Everyone's places had already been set, little cards marking where we were supposed to sit. I paused for just a second, scanning the arrangement. Thalassa and Oberon were positioned right in the middle, the natural center of attention. My parents flanked them on either side, proud and beaming, their joy radiating outward. My card sat further down, near the edge, like an afterthought. Respect isn't demanded, it's arranged. That phrase echoed in my head as I slid into my chair. They hadn't said a word, but the seating chart had told the entire story. I settled in, folding the napkin across my lap, but the feeling in my chest was familiar and heavy. It was the same choreography I had lived for years, them in the spotlight, me at the margins, my role disguised as an accident. The waiter poured water into my glass, his smile kind and unknowing. He didn't see the fissures forming at the table. The first courses came out, plates of bread and salads passed along. Relatives laughed, clinked glasses, asked about work and kids. For a while, I stayed quiet, answering when asked, pushing lettuce around my plate. I was almost convincing myself I could slip through unnoticed. Then it happened. As the waiter approached with another tray, he stopped right beside me. "Ma'am," he said politely, "could you pass this to the table?" The words fell heavy in my ears. He had mistaken me for staff, standing at the far end near the swinging kitchen door. My chair wasn't just at the edge, it was practically out of the picture. I reached for the tray, my hands steady, but inside I felt the sting rising fast. Before I could speak, Thalassa chuckled lightly, her voice carrying just far enough. She didn't correct him, not really. "Oh, don't mind," she said sweetly. "Leah always ends up in that spot." The table rippled with soft laughter. Someone leaned over to add, "Well, Thalassa always does get the prime seat, doesn't she?" It was meant as a joke, but it landed like a blow. The misplaced chair mirrored my misplaced role in this family, always reliable, always present, but never fully seen. I straightened in my seat, my eyes sweeping the table. "Funny," I said calmly, my tone even but edged. "How my seat always ends up here, almost like someone planned it." The words sliced through the chatter. For a moment, silence hung, thick and heavy. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat. Oberon's eyes flicked to me, sharp, calculating, then back to his wine. The rest of the meal carried on, but the crack had been felt. It was small, but it spread like a fault line under pressure. Later in the evening, after the main course was served, Oberon stood and lifted his glass. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that carried easily over a crowd. "We wanted to be honest with family," he said warmly. "That's what family deserves, honesty." Nods spread around the table. A cousin murmured, "That's brave," and another added, "We appreciate your openness." Their words wrapped him in a halo of virtue. I sat still, my hands folded, watching the scene unfold. Honesty. The word twisted in me. This was the same man who had let me carry the weight of infertility, who had lied with practiced ease. And now, he cloaked himself in moral language, turning deceit into nobility. Inside, I seethed. There's nothing more dangerous than a liar who cloaks himself in virtue. That truth echoed in my mind, sharp and undeniable. But I didn't speak yet. I smiled faintly, letting the corners of my lips lift. My silence here wasn't surrender. It was calculation. When the glasses lowered and chatter resumed, I leaned forward slightly. My voice carried just enough to be heard, but soft enough to seem almost casual. Honesty, I said, is only brave when it's not selective. The table froze again. Chairs creaked, eyes shifted nervously. My words lingered in the air like smoke. Oberon chuckled, his laugh a little too forced. Of course, he said quickly, brushing it off. But his eyes flickered with discomfort, betraying what his tone tried to hide. Thalassa shifted in her seat, her smile faltering for just a moment. The jab had landed closer than either of them expected. I leaned back, sipping my water, steady as ever. For years, I had been the silent background, the dependable shadow, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer content to watch them perform unchecked. The shower would be the decisive moment, and I was preparing for it. The stage was almost ready, and for once, I wouldn't sit in the shadows. They thought I was still playing the quiet sister, but the dinner table had already felt my first tremor. The Peninsula Hotel in Chicago was dressed to impress. Chandeliers cast warm light over polished floors, and every table gleamed with pastel linens and centerpieces of roses and baby's breath. To the guests, it was a picture-perfect baby shower, filled with joy, anticipation, and pride. To me, it was a stage carefully designed to humiliate. I walked in quietly, carrying a small gift wrapped in pale blue paper, though my presence itself felt like an afterthought. Guests were already bustling about, arms filled with diaper cakes and gift bags, their laughter echoing through the high-ceilinged hall. Everywhere I looked, I saw smiles, flashes of phones capturing the moment, relatives embracing Thalassa as if she were a saint. She stood at the center of it all, glowing in a fitted white dress, her hair styled to perfection, makeup flawless. She didn't just arrive, she commanded the room. People gravitated toward her like moths to a flame. And Oberon, my husband, hovered at her side, his hand brushing her arm as if they had practiced it. He smiled warmly at her, protective, attentive, the picture of devotion. I took a seat near the edge, my chair tucked just enough to remind me where they wanted me, present but unseen. From where I sat, I could hear bits of conversation around me. Baby showers are so important, one aunt said. It's not just about gifts, it's about family legacy. Another added, twins, can you imagine how blessed that would be? My stomach tightened. They didn't know yet, but I did. I already sensed this entire production was set up to break me, and I refused to give them the satisfaction. The hum of voices quieted suddenly as Thalassa tapped her champagne glass with a spoon. The clear ring echoed across the hall. All eyes turned toward her, the cameras already lifted. She waited, savoring the silence like a seasoned actress pausing before her line. I have news to share, she said, her voice sweet, dripping with pride. Oberon stepped closer, placing his hand gently on her back as if to steady her. She paused, smiled at him, then looked out at the crowd. Oberon and I, she announced, are expecting twins. The room erupted. Cheers, applause, clapping hands against the table. Guests leapt to their feet, some rushing to hug her, others crowding around to shower her with congratulations. Phones flashed, video streamed, voices layered over one another with delight. Twins, someone near me whispered, their voice trembling with joy. What a blessing. Finally, real grandchildren. The words sliced deep, but I kept my face calm, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Inside, though, it felt like a knife wrapped in velvet, pressing against my ribs. I could almost hear their plan echoing in my ears, to make the announcement here, in front of everyone, to use public joy as the dagger aimed at me. I breathed slowly, reminding myself, don't break. Not here, not yet. Applause died down, replaced with hushed awe, as Thalassa placed Oberon's hand over her belly. The move was deliberate, a pose for every camera pointed at her. Then, she turned, her eyes locking on mine across the room. She tilted her head, smirked faintly, and said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "We're the real family now." The words landed like a thunderclap. The hall, moments ago buzzing with joy, went still. Forks froze mid-air, conversations cut short. People shifted, their gazes darting between her and me. They waited for my collapse, for my tears, for the scene they were promised. Oberon gave me a look I had seen countless times before, the rehearsed expression of pity. His brows softened, his lips pressed together in false sympathy, but beneath it, arrogance dripped from his eyes. He was sure I would crumble, sure that the narrative was in his control. I sat perfectly still. My fingers traced the rim of my glass, my expression neutral. Inside, fury burned, but outwardly I gave them nothing, not a tear, not a flinch. They wanted me to collapse, I told myself. They wanted me to scream. But all I gave them was silence. I lifted my glass slightly, as if acknowledging the room. The silence thickened, uncomfortable for everyone but me. The guests shifted in their seats, unsure whether to smile or look away. In that silence, I realized I had taken back control, not with words, but with stillness. Humiliation wasn't new to me. I had lived with it for years, ignored, overshadowed, erased. But tonight was different. Tonight wasn't just another slight. Tonight was a performance, rehearsed and staged, designed to erase me entirely. They wanted this to be my destruction, my breaking point. Yet as I sat there, calm in the storm, I understood something vital. Humiliation is the favorite weapon of the insecure. They had built this elaborate theater to prove their power, but power doesn't need proof, and their very need to display it revealed the cracks already forming beneath their facade. I vowed silently then, this moment, meant to kill me, would be the very thing I used to end them. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Every second I withheld a reaction, I tightened the noose of their own arrogance. The room eventually shifted back to laughter and chatter, though the discomfort lingered in the corners. But inside, I was steady, sharper than ever. They thought they had written my ending. They didn't realize I was only waiting, biding my time. They thought the shower was my funeral, but it was only the stage for their downfall. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. We're the real family now. The hall at the peninsula froze. Forks clattered against porcelain, a child hushed mid-laugh, and suddenly all the sound that had filled the room a moment before collapsed into a vacuum. Every eye turned to me, waiting, expecting, willing me to break. They wanted tears, a raised voice, a spectacle to crown the drama Thalassa had so carefully staged. But I did not give them what they wanted. I sat still, spine straight, the stem of my wineglass cool beneath my fingers. I let the silence expand, grow so heavy it seemed to press against the chandeliers until even they trembled in the draught. I drew the rim of the glass to my lips, sipping slowly, stretching the pause until it became unbearable, not for me, but for them. Guests shuffled uncomfortably, their faces caught between pity and embarrassment. A cough broke the stillness, then faded, leaving the weight intact. Stillness is not weakness, it is the preparation of strength. I had learned that through years of humiliation, years of being pushed aside. Tonight, that lesson became my shield. My silence, sharp as steel, roared louder than their announcement. I lowered the glass deliberately, my eyes sweeping the table. A cousin whispered behind a hand, "Why isn't she saying anything?" Another shifted, glancing at me with anticipation, as if my response might set the ceiling crashing down. I let a faint smile curl my lips. If they wanted theater, I would give them a performance, just not the one they had rehearsed. My wineglass remained lifted, poised like a conductor's baton, commanding the atmosphere without a single word. Thalassa fidgeted, smoothing the fabric of her dress as though it might cover her nerves. She forced a laugh, but it landed awkwardly, brittle in the quiet. Oberon, for his part, pretended calm, leaning back in his chair with a mask of composure. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted toward me, quick, sharp glances as though measuring how much I knew. The wineglass was no longer just glass. It was control. It was silence weaponized, and every passing second, every breath that filled the void, deepened the unease. Then, in the corner of my eye, I noticed it. A guest, one of Thalassa's friends, had their phone propped up on the table, the screen glowing. A red dot blinked in the corner. They were live streaming. The entire charade, her announcement, the silence, my stillness, was being broadcast in real time to whoever cared to watch. My pulse steadied, not quickened. Perfect. Let the world watch. Thalassa noticed it too, and her performance shifted instantly. She angled her body toward the phone, resting Oberon's hand over her stomach again, smiling wide enough to stretch the skin of her cheeks. She leaned close to him, whispering something staged, then looked back at the camera, glowing with manufactured joy. I stayed calm. I knew her performance would collapse the moment truth surfaced, and when it did, the live stream would ensure the whole world saw it unravel. In America today, reputation doesn't die in private whispers. It dies in 30 seconds of live footage. The room's chatter grew uneven, the silence having done its work. Guests glanced from her, radiant for the camera, to me, unmoved and unshaken. I let them sit in that uncertainty. Let them feel the shift in balance that none of them could name yet, but all of them sensed. Inside, my mind traveled back briefly to Oberon's lie at the fertility clinic. The night he told me it must be me, that I was broken. I thought of the paper proof I carried, tucked away safely, the record of his vasectomy, the lie he had built everything on. I had kept it close, waiting for the right stage, and now I realized that stage was being recorded for posterity. They wrote this script, I reminded myself, but I hold the final act. So I sat, letting the silence stretch once more, watching as both guests in the room and strangers online grew restless. My face stayed calm, my smile faint but deliberate. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to call names or cry. The truth would roar louder than anything I could say. I raised my glass higher, the gesture smooth, unhurried, commanding. And in that motion, I prepared to let silence speak louder than all their lies. The world was watching, and I was ready to let silence speak louder than their lies. The silence in the banquet hall stretched like an elastic band pulled to its breaking point. My wine glass hovered just above the table, catching the chandelier's glow, and I let my hand linger deliberately. Guests whispered in pockets, their voices hushed, their eyes darting between me and the spectacle at the center. I felt their anticipation, but not their pity. My pulse didn't race, it steadied. For the first time that evening, I wasn't surviving the script, I was taking ownership of it. Thalassa still beamed, radiant in her white dress, her hand tangled possessively with Oberon's. She leaned into him, eyes sweeping the crowd with triumph, confident she had won. She had no idea. They had the stage, I thought, but I had the script. Slowly, I reached into my bag, fingers brushing the envelope I had carried with me for weeks. Smooth paper against my palm, solid and undeniable, unlike their lies. I rose from my chair, the faint scrape of wood against tile drawing the attention I wanted. The chatter dimmed. I held the envelope as I walked toward the MC, whose eyes widened at the gesture. "Would you mind reading this aloud?" I asked softly, placing it into their hands. Confusion rippled across the faces around me. To them, it looked like a toast, maybe a sentimental letter, perhaps even a gift. A few guests leaned in with curiosity. The MC hesitated, their fingers hovering before carefully tearing the seal. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. Inside, I whispered to myself, the truth doesn't tremble. Paper doesn't lie. The room hushed further as the MC unfolded the document. Their voice, usually light, faltered with the weight of what was written. They cleared their throat and began. "These are certified medical records," the MC read, "confirming that Oberon underwent a vasectomy 2 years ago." The words dropped like stones into still water. For a second, silence reigned. Then the gasps came, sharp intakes of breath, murmurs rising, a fork clattering against porcelain. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "What?" Too loudly, and the echo carried. All eyes turned to Oberon and Thalassa. He froze, his face draining of color, the confident smirk collapsing into shock. Thalassa's smile faltered, her fingers still gripping his but trembling. I stepped closer, my voice calm but cutting through the chaos. "Funny," I said, each syllable deliberate. "How a man who can't have children suddenly expects twins." Gasps swept through the room again, sharper this time. Guests twisted in their seats, eyes filled with disgust, betrayal, dawning realization. The live stream phone that had been recording earlier now caught every word, every reaction, broadcasting it beyond these walls. Thalassa stared at me, stunned, her lips parting, but no words coming out. Oberon looked around wildly, searching for a lie that could save him, but nothing came. He knew. They all knew. Lies run fast, but truth runs farther. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence after my words screamed louder than any outburst could. The hall fractured into chaos. Relatives whispered furiously, accusations spilling like water from a broken dam. Some stood and left, unwilling to stay another moment in the theater of their disgrace. A few stared openly, shaking their heads. One voice near me muttered, "She planned this." And it was brilliant. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. Relief washed over me in a strange calm. This wasn't victory, it was release. Years of humiliation pressed down into this single moment, and now the weight lifted, not with triumph, but with truth. I returned to my seat, wine glass still in hand. Around me, the crowd churned, the couple at the center scrambling in the ruins of their lie. Thalassa's eyes were wet now, mascara streaking, Oberon's hand slack in hers. They built their family on sand, I thought, and I only showed the tide. But I wasn't done. This was just the first strike. I had one more envelope waiting, the kind that didn't just reveal the truth, but sealed their fate. And as they scrambled in the ruins of their lie, I smiled, because I still had one more envelope. The revelation of the vasectomy papers struck the hall like a bolt of lightning. For a beat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then sound erupted, gasps sharp enough to echo against the chandeliers, whispers buzzing like angry bees, the scrape of chairs as people shifted in shock. Eyes turned, not to me, but to Oberon and Thalassa, the perfect couple who had been unmasked in a single page of truth. I didn't move. I sat still in my chair, wineglass steady in my hand, narrating in silence to myself. When the truth lands, it doesn't need help. It spreads like fire. Around me, the flames caught. Aunts leaned toward each other, whispering about betrayal. Uncles shook their heads, muttering about shame. Some guests openly glared, their disbelief turning to outrage. The livestream camera still blinked, capturing every raw reaction, every angle of their disgrace. In America, families cling to reputation. Pride can be patched over, but reputation, once shattered, cuts too deep to repair. And in this hall, ours had just collapsed like glass dropped from the highest floor. My silence turned the banquet into a courtroom, the guests into a jury, and the verdict was already being whispered across the tablecloths. Oberon tried to steady himself, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Thalassa dabbed her cheek with a napkin, tears welling, her lips trembling in a mask of fragility. For years, she had played the golden child, untouchable. Now, she looked small, cornered, stripped of the invincibility she had paraded. Then the knives came, not from me, but from the family. "You planned this? At her shower?" hissed one of my aunts, her voice shaking with disgust. Another relative leaned forward, her tone sharp. "You tried to use all of us to humiliate her? In public?" Thalassa clutched her belly, her voice high and trembling. "I didn't know! I swear I didn't know!" But the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. No one believed her. Not anymore. Oberon opened his mouth, stammering for words, but no sentence formed. His confidence had drained along with the color from his face. He looked like a man stripped of every defense, cornered with nothing left to wield. I sat still, letting the waves of condemnation roll over them. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Vindication tastes best when savored quietly. Truth is heavy, I thought. So few carry it. But when it drops, everyone feels the weight. And then the final nail was hammered in. Cousin Nixon, known for never holding his tongue, rose from his chair. His voice carried across the hall, sharp, undeniable. "Wait a second. Didn't you have surgery 2 years ago, Oberon?" The room froze. Forks hovered, glasses paused mid-air, all eyes swung to him. The silence this time wasn't mine. It was his. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his lips parted, but nothing came. His silence was his confession. Guests began shaking their heads, muttering with rising disgust. So it's true. He lied to all of us. Used her, then tried to erase her. The words piled on, louder and harsher, until the noise of their judgment drowned out the clink of dishes and the hum of background music. I watched quietly. His silence confirmed what I had known for months, what I had carried alone. Now it was out in the open, undeniable, recorded live. No excuses left, no alibis strong enough to rebuild what had crumbled. Family gatherings in America often pretend at civility. But once the elephant in the room is exposed, the brutality is quick and merciless. There is no gentle dismantling, only a public tearing down, swift and absolute. The hall shifted from whispers to movement. Chairs scraped. Guests stood. Some refused to look at Thalassa or Oberon as they walked toward the doors. A few left their gifts behind on the table, abandoning them like evidence of complicity they no longer wanted to carry. I felt it then, not triumph, not glee, but release. The tension I had held inside, the weight of humiliation, all of it loosened from my shoulders. It wasn't victory I tasted. It was relief. My silence had forced the lies to devour themselves. They had sharpened their blade against me, but it was their own throats it cut. I thought of a line I'd once read. Revenge is not about destruction, it's about restoration of truth. And truth had restored me tonight, but this was not the end. This was only the fallout, the tremors after the first quake. I still had another envelope, one that would not just humiliate but dismantle, legally and permanently. They thought humiliation was the end, but I had one more truth, and it would finish them. The banquet hall hadn't recovered from the weight of the first revelation before Thalassa lurched forward, her performance taking on a new desperation. The whispers had grown into a wave, relatives speaking in sharp tones, some abandoning their seats altogether. For a moment, she pressed her napkin to her face, and then her voice rose above the storm. "It's a miracle!" she cried, her voice trembling but pitched to be heard across the room. "The doctors said it was rare, but possible. Oberon's surgery didn't take. This pregnancy. It's proof that God works in mysterious ways." The words hung, her tone frantic, pleading. I sat still, watching the attempt like one might watch a drowning person claw at the surface of the water. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table, searching faces for sympathy. But instead of belief, she found skepticism. Relatives exchanged uneasy looks, heads shaking subtly. Inside, my mind framed it simply. A lie repeated in desperation only digs the grave deeper. Oberon stayed silent, his shame carved into every line of his face. He stared down at the tablecloth, unable to meet a single gaze. And in that silence, his complicity roared louder than her cries. But Thalassa wasn't done. She straightened, her eyes red, mascara trailing. "This is God's gift," she insisted, her voice breaking. "Twins are proof of our love, proof that this family is blessed." Around her, phones began to rise. Guests recorded, some openly, others under the cover of lowered heads. I caught one cousin whispering as they angled their camera. "She's burying herself." I sipped my water, steady, and thought, she wasn't saving herself. She was engraving her humiliation in permanent ink. The room's energy shifted from shock to disbelief. Americans will forgive a mistake, a stumble, even a failure. But they despise being insulted with obvious lies. The unease thickened, the air growing heavier as her voice echoed against walls that no longer sheltered her. Oberon didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He sat slumped, his eyes fixed on his untouched plate, avoiding every gaze, even hers. His cowardice was louder than any confession. At the far end of the table, my mother Zephyra finally moved. She leaned forward, her voice soft, meant to soothe. Maybe it's possible," she offered weakly, her eyes darting between relatives and the crumpled papers lying near the MC. But her words withered under the weight of those documents. One uncle's voice cut through. "Possible? You think we're fools?" Another relative snapped. "You knew? You protected her while they planned this?" My parents froze, caught between defense and shame. My father Calix clenched his jaw, his silence the only answer he had. And then, slowly, they turned. Literally turned their backs to Thalassa, shifting their chairs toward the rest of the family. The message was clear. They couldn't stand beside her lies anymore. I watched it unfold with a detached calm. The ones who raised her couldn't stand beside her anymore. The symbolism struck me. Parental love, usually the strongest bond, had crumbled under the undeniable weight of truth. Then it was my turn. I stood, smooth, unhurried. The hall stilled again, eyes shifting to me. From my bag, I pulled another envelope, its edges crisp, its seal unbroken. With a steady hand, I placed it on the table, pushing it forward until it rested in full view. "This," I said, my voice even, cutting through the murmurs, "is the last time my name will protect you." The MC opened it, their voice catching as they read aloud. Inside were divorce papers already signed, stapled alongside Oberon's financial statements, each page a record of his betrayal. Bank accounts, hidden transfers, debts tied to my name but benefiting him. Gasps erupted, sharper than before. Some covered their mouths, others leaned back as if the truth itself had weight that pushed them away from the table. The live stream still blinked red. Every face, every gasp, every page fluttering in the MC's hand was captured, broadcast instantly into the endless archive of the internet. This wasn't just a family collapse anymore, it was a public reckoning. Oberon slumped further, his head in his hands. Thalassa's sobs grew louder, almost theatrical again, but no one moved to comfort her. Not even our parents. I stood steady, watching without triumph, without gloating. My reflection was simple. Justice doesn't need rage. It only needs timing. And I had chosen the timing perfectly. As the last murmurs faded, I felt something inside me loosen. The weight I had carried, the humiliation, the silence. It began to lift. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about liberation. As I slid the envelope across the table, I knew I wasn't burning bridges. I was freeing myself from them. The room still trembled from the weight of what had been revealed. Papers on the table lay like shattered glass, dangerous to touch, impossible to ignore. Thalassa's sobs carried across the hall, uneven, desperate, echoing off the walls. Oberon slouched in his chair, his once confident shoulders now caved inward, eyes fixed on nothing. Guests whispered in clusters, some rising to leave with sharp shakes of their heads, others pausing only to offer me sidelong glances, their eyes full of pity and perhaps quiet respect. I watched them both, but felt detached, as though a glass wall separated me from the wreckage. They no longer had power over me. Their humiliation had ceased to be my burden. It was now theirs to carry, their ruin to manage. I was simply a witness. I thought to myself, destruction isn't always tragic. Sometimes it's the beginning of clarity. What had crumbled wasn't my life, it was the illusion that had bound me for years. I was still standing. And in that realization, I found strength. The murmurs grew quieter as people noticed me rise, glass still in hand. I tapped it lightly, the delicate chime commanding silence better than any shout could. Faces turned, conversations stopped. Even Thalassa's sobs dulled to hiccups as she looked up, mascara streaked across her face. Oberon refused to meet my eyes. I raised my glass one final time, not in anger, not in triumph, but in calm. "To family," I began, my voice steady. Not the kind built on lies, not the kind that feeds on betrayal or silence, but the kind built on truth and respect. The words echoed, simple and clear. Some relatives nodded, the truth in them undeniable. A few clapped lightly, hesitant but genuine. My father's face tightened, my mother stared down at the tablecloth. Thalassa glared at me through tears, her lips pressed thin. Oberon shifted uncomfortably, gripping the edge of his chair as if it might steady him. Inside, I narrated to myself, it wasn't revenge in that glass, it was release. I set the glass down, the sound deliberate, final. Then I stepped away from the table, past the wreckage of my marriage, past the hushed voices and accusing stares, out through the double doors into the night air. The city greeted me with cool air, crisp and bracing. I breathed it in, letting it fill my lungs like medicine. And then I saw her, Eulalia, my oldest friend, standing near the entrance. She had been there quietly all night, a shadow at the edge, but now she stepped forward, her face bright with pride. "You held your ground, Leah," she said, her voice firm. "That's the you I always knew was in there." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "I was afraid," I admitted softly. "Afraid I'd break in front of them." She placed her hand on my arm. "Breaking isn't weakness. It's refusing to rise that is. You rose tonight." Her words settled into me with warmth I hadn't felt in years. Americans often say that friends become the family we choose, and in that moment, I understood it fully. Eulalia wasn't just a friend. She was an anchor, grounding me, proving I wasn't alone. We stood together for a moment, the hotel lights casting long shadows across the pavement. Guests trickled past us, their eyes filled with questions they didn't dare ask, their whispers fading into the night. I didn't need their approval. I had what I needed. Gratitude swelled in me, not just for Eulalia, but for the clarity the night had brought. The gaslighting, the betrayal, the humiliations, all of it had led me here. To this moment of release, to the freedom of walking away. I thought of a phrase I had once read. Sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do, and now I understood it with every step I took away from that hall. Bittersweet freedom filled me. I had lost illusions, yes. I had lost the comfort of believing my family might change. But I had gained clarity. I had reclaimed myself. My future would not be easy. I knew that. But it would be mine, unshackled, unmanipulated, unbroken. And that was enough. I looked once more toward the glowing hotel windows. Inside, Thalassa and Oberon faced not just my silence, but the full force of consequence. Their reckoning had only begun, and I would not be there to carry it for them. I wasn't leaving empty. I was leaving free, and their reckoning was only beginning. The hall had not yet exhaled from the weight of everything exposed when I stood once more. The air was thick with shame and whispers, and the wreckage of Oberon and Thalassa's performance lay in front of me like shattered glass across the floor. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't waver. Calmly, I slid the second envelope across the table. The scrape of paper against linen was louder than the chatter. Gasps broke out before anyone even knew what it contained. Oberon's head snapped up, his face pale, his eyes searching for some last thread to hold on to. Thalassa gripped his arm, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I kept my tone steady, cold and final. "This is the last time my name will protect you." The MC, hands hesitant, opened the envelope. Divorce papers fell out, neat, signed, stamped in black ink. Attached were financial records, pages showing hidden accounts and transfers, debts Oberon had tethered to me without consent. The truth spread across the tablecloth like spilled wine, staining everything it touched. Gasps rippled through the guests. One uncle muttered, "Unbelievable." Another shook his head, whispering, "She planned this perfectly." Oberon slumped, his body collapsing into the chair as if the papers themselves carried the weight of judgment. Thalassa sobbed, not in triumph this time, but in pure collapse, her cries unspooling into the corners of the room. The documents weren't just legal. They were my freedom carved in ink. I thought of Hemingway's words. Courage is grace under pressure, and in that moment I understood them completely. Relatives' voices grew louder now, their scorn no longer contained. One aunt pointed a trembling finger toward the couple. "You planned to erase her, and now you've erased yourselves." Murmurs of agreement swept through the hall. My parents, Zephyra and Calyx, avoided my eyes, their faces etched with shame. They didn't defend Thalassa anymore. They couldn't. Thalassa tried once more, her voice shrill. "It's all a mistake. None of this is true." But no one believed her. Not now. Oberon tried to speak, muttering weakly, "It's not what it looks like." But his words faded into the clamor. His image of control, his mask of virtue, had disintegrated. I narrated silently to myself. Their empire of lies crumbled faster than they built it. I didn't stay to watch them unravel further. I had done enough. I turned, walking toward the doors as their voices dissolved into chaos behind me. The cool night air of Chicago wrapped around me like a balm. The city lights glittered, indifferent to the ruins I had left inside. I exhaled, each breath lighter than the last. And then a voice, quiet but firm, stopped me. That was brave. I turned. A young hotel staff member, Orlin, stood near the entrance, eyes steady, expression sincere. Just 3 words, spoken softly, but they pierced deeper than all the applause or silence inside. I paused, letting their weight settle. Sometimes family doesn't see you, I thought, but strangers can. That acknowledgement, simple and unpolished, gave me an unexpected warmth. It proved I was not invisible. Recognition didn't need to come from blood. It could come from truth, even from someone who owed me nothing. I felt lighter in that moment than I had in years. I walked further into the night, Eulalia falling into step beside me, her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. Gratitude filled me, not just for her, not just for Orlin's words, but for the clarity this entire ordeal had given me. Gaslighting, betrayal, humiliation, years of carrying shame that was never mine, all of it had led to this. And tonight, it ended. Sometimes walking away is the loudest form of justice. The thought ran through me as steady as my heartbeat. My future was unwritten, uncertain, and yes, it would be difficult, but it would be mine. Mine to craft with dignity, not lies. Mine to build without their manipulation. In America, people often talk about independence as a right, but the truth is, sometimes it's a fight. Choosing self-respect over toxic ties is one of the bravest steps anyone can take. Tonight, I had taken it. I didn't need my parents' validation. I didn't need Oberon's pity or Thalassa's envy. I had my own strength, my own clarity, my own voice. And that was enough. As I turned the corner, the hotel fading behind me, I felt the finality of it settle into my bones. I hadn't just endured their betrayal. I had dismantled it. I didn't just survive their betrayal. I rewrote the ending, and this time, I was the author.